Welcome back for another deep dive. And today we're heading into modern China, but we're skipping the usual headlines. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Instead, we're going deep into a memoir by this British designer who spent several years working there. And let me tell you, things get pretty wild.
Well, what's so unique about this memoir is the perspective it offers. I mean, we're seeing China through the eyes of an artist, someone who's really tuned into the nuances of design culture, all those tiny details that reveal so much about a society.
Exactly. And he's not going in as some, finance guy or diplomat.
Yeah.
He's a designer at heart. And that makes his observations even more fascinating because he's thrown headfirst into this world of rapid modernization,
Yeah.
but constantly bumping up against, remnants of China's past, which he describes as like real mind-bending experience.
Yeah, that clash between old and new is a constant thread throughout the book. Like, there's this one part where he visits this historical site, super significant to the Communist Party, but instead of, quiet reflection, he's surrounded by all these marketing pitches for like family-oriented leisure offerings. It's this jarring contrast that really highlights just how fast things are changing in China.
It's almost as if he's trying to grasp the weight of history while being bombarded by just the sheer energy of modern China.
Right.
And speaking of energy, there's this crazy anecdote about a karaoke singing billionaire who gifts him 2 bottles of insanely expensive wine. What do you make of that?
Well, it's a fantastic story, but it also speaks volumes about the importance of guanxi in Chinese culture, that idea of cultivating personal relationships, networks of trust and obligation. It's crucial in Chinese business and just society in general.
Yeah.
Have you ever experienced that kind of emphasis on personal connections in your work?
Hmm. It definitely makes me think about how we approach networking and building trust in Western cultures. But getting back to the memoir, the designer dives into his work life pretty quickly, and it's clear that long hours and constant negotiation are just the norm. There's this one story about the cottage ceiling that really stood out to me.
Ah, yes, that's a perfect example of how cultural assumptions can clash in the workplace. He's tasked with creating this cozy, cottage-like feel, but his Chinese colleagues just don't get it. To them, high ceilings equal prestige, even in a rustic setting.
It really highlights just how deeply ingrained these cultural values are, even in something as seemingly simple as interior design. And speaking of cultural gaps, he constantly relies on his younger Chinese colleagues to navigate everyday life, like setting up his phone to ordering basic necessities.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that no matter how much you prepare, you'll inevitably encounter situations where local knowledge is just essential. These colleagues become his guides, helping him adapt to a world that's in constant flux.
It makes you wonder if he would have felt even more lost without those connections. Now let's move beyond the office and into the social landscape. One thing that really jumps out is the designer's description of the lack of personal space, something he finds quite jarring at first.
Right, that's definitely something a lot of Westerners experience in China. But as he spends more time there, he starts to pick up on the subtle social cues, the etiquette that govern these seemingly crowded interactions. He realizes that what might seem intrusive in one culture can have a totally different meaning in another.
It's like learning a whole new language of social interaction. And he also talks about this contrast between those bustling, impersonal cityscapes and the tranquil, carefully designed parks. It's as if those parks offer a momentary escape from the intensity of urban life.
Absolutely. It speaks to that Chinese concept of balance, the idea of finding harmony between these opposing forces. And this is something you see reflected in everything from their philosophy and art to traditional medicine, even urban planning.
Now, there's this rather unsettling story about these falling person videos that he describes, seeing people intentionally falling, faking injuries for financial gain. It's a bit hard to wrap your head around.
It is a difficult topic, but it reveals a complex social issue. Apparently, there's this widespread fear in China of being held financially responsible if you help someone who's injured. And this fear, unfortunately, can lead to some really tragic consequences where people hesitate to help those who have genuinely fallen.
It makes you think about how cultural norms and individual behavior can intersect sometimes in ways that are hard to grasp from an outsider's perspective.
Exactly. And our designer is clearly grappling with those complexities, trying to make sense of a world that often feels both familiar and totally alien. Which, speaking of alien experiences, brings us to his food adventures, or maybe we should call them misadventures.
Yes. His struggles with the intense spice levels of Chinese cuisine are hilarious and so relatable.
Mm.
He talks about his taste buds staging a revolt, and the infamous pig brain soup incident sounds truly terrifying.
While those anecdotes are definitely funny, they offer a glimpse into something deeper. Sharing meals is a hugely important social ritual in China, and his willingness to try new things, even if they horrify him, shows a real desire to immerse himself in the culture, even if it means stepping way outside his comfort zone.
He's definitely not afraid to be uncomfortable, which is admirable. It seems like beneath the humor, there's a real vulnerability in those moments, as if he's saying, I'm here to experience it all, even the parts that make my stomach churn.
And that openness to new experiences is so crucial when you're navigating a new culture. Being able to laugh at yourself, to find the humor in the unexpected, can make all the difference.
It makes you wonder if that same openness is what allows him to find those moments of genuine human connection, even when he's feeling isolated. He talks about connecting with people through shared interests, like his love of craftsmanship.
Those connections are so vital, especially when you're feeling like an outsider. And they often pop up in the most unexpected ways. Like there's this beautiful story where he describes crow whispering in a Hangzhou plaza. He uses almonds to befriend these crows, finding a strange kind of solace in this unlikely connection.
It's like he's finding these little pockets of familiarity, these moments of shared experience that ground him in this unfamiliar world. And this whole idea of connection is further explored through his fascination with Chinese nonverbal communication, particularly the difficulty of reading facial expressions and body language. What do you make of that?
It points to the inherent challenges of cross-cultural communication. We often rely on those nonverbal cues to build relationships, but in a culture where those cues are so different, it can feel like you're constantly missing something crucial.
Yeah.
And it speaks to this deeper yearning for connection that runs through the entire book.
He's clearly aware that there are these layers of meaning he's not quite grasping. And I think that awareness fuels his observations and makes them even more insightful. Now, as he spends more time in China, we see a shift in his perspective. That initial frustration gives way to a grudging admiration for the efficiency and pragmatism of Chinese society.
Mm-hmm.
And this shift is perfectly illustrated in what he calls the trench run episode,
Yeah.
where he's trying to navigate the overwhelming consumerism of a Shanghai mall. He feels both bombarded and invisible, highlighting those stark differences between Western and Chinese approaches to problem solving.
Right.
It's like he's starting to see the world through a different lens, appreciating the strengths of a system that initially felt so alien. Have you ever experienced that kind of shift in perspective when immersed in a different culture?
Oh, absolutely. It's an essential part of cultural immersion. It's not about, abandoning your own values, but about developing a deeper understanding of different ways of thinking and being.
It's like you're expanding your definition of what's possible, what's considered normal. And in this case, the designer is grappling with a really profound question. This feeling of belonging, or rather not belonging. He uses this powerful metaphor of being a boiled egg, white on the outside, yellow on the inside, never fully at home in either culture.
It's a feeling that resonates with so many people who have lived between worlds. That constant negotiation of identity, the challenge of finding your place when you don't quite fit in anywhere. It can be a difficult but also transformative experience.
And I think that's what makes this memoir so compelling. It's not just a travelogue, it's a deeply personal exploration of cultural immersion identity and the search for connection in a world that can feel increasingly divided.
It's a reminder that even when we feel like outsiders, we can still find ways to connect, to grow, and to create a sense of belonging for ourselves. And those connections, those moments of shared humanity are what make the journey worthwhile. Makes you think about belonging as like a process, not an endpoint.
Yeah.
Like this constant negotiation of who you are in relation to everything around you, embracing that discomfort, and ultimately finding a way to be comfortable with those in-between spaces.
I like that belonging as a
Yeah.
process, because it's not a one-time achievement, is it? It's something you're constantly working towards, especially when you're immersed in a culture so different from your own. There's this point in the memoir where someone tells the designer, you are Chinese now. And it's meant as a compliment, but you can just sense his internal conflict.
Right. On the surface, it seems welcoming, but it kind of highlights the fact that even with really deep immersion, that sense of truly belonging can still be elusive. He's still seen as an outsider or, as he puts it, a boiled egg.
Yeah.
Which leads to some really insightful reflections on how our experiences shape our sense of self and the transformative power of encountering these different cultures.
It's like he's questioning what it means to truly belong, if it's even possible to fully integrate into a culture that's not your own. While he's wrestling with these questions internally, there's a parallel track in the memoir where he talks about the difficulty of understanding Chinese nonverbal communication. He describes people around him as impassive, neutral, even inscrutable.
Those are loaded terms, aren't they?
Yeah.
They reflect some common Western stereotypes about Asian cultures being emotionally reserved or difficult to read. But what's interesting is that the designer recognizes this is just his limited understanding. He's missing those nuances, the subtle cues that reveal what's really going on beneath the surface.
So it's not that they're lacking emotion, it's that he's lacking the cultural context to interpret those emotions.
Hmm.
It goes back to his yearning for connection. He wants to understand to build those deeper relationships, but he's hitting a wall. It's as if he's trying to read a book in a language he doesn't fully comprehend. There's meaning there, but it's just beyond his grasp.
And this leads him to reflect on how our own cultural baggage can blind us to other ways of being. He draws this fascinating parallel between his early exposure to American adventure serials like Flash Gordon, with its stereotypical portrayal of, Ming the Merciless, and his current experience in China.
That's a really thought-provoking connection. It's like those early cultural influences have shaped his perception of China, creating a filter through which he's viewing his present experiences.
It's a reminder that we all approach new cultures with this set of preconceived notions, and part of the journey of cultural immersion is about deconstructing those notions, questioning the narratives we've been told, and allowing ourselves to see the world through a different lens. Speaking of seeing the world differently, there's this great anecdote about the Chinese New Year holiday and how it completely upends his expectations.
Right. He's thinking it'll be a few days off like Christmas in the West,
Yeah.
but then he realizes it encompasses multiple holidays, leading to this extended period where work essentially shuts down. He's left with this vast empty space in his schedule, and he doesn't know what to do with himself.
It throws him completely off balance, but it also reveals something important about the Chinese approach to work-life balance. This prioritization of family tradition and collective celebration is something he's only beginning to grasp. And his initial reaction, that sense of disorientation, shows how deeply ingrained our own cultural assumptions about time and productivity can be.
It makes me think about how we structure our lives around work in Western cultures. Are we missing out on something by not having these extended periods of collective downtime? I'm also struck by the way the designer finds ways to cope with those feelings of isolation and uncertainty. He doesn't shy away from those difficult emotions. There's a real honesty in his writing that makes his journey relatable, even if our specific experiences are very different.
Absolutely. And despite those struggles, he keeps seeking out connection, finding meaning in the most unexpected places. He describes this wonderful encounter with a group of craftsmen where, despite the language barrier, he feels this sense of kinship, a connection that transcends those cultural differences.
It's like their shared passion for craftsmanship creates a bridge between them. They're speaking a different language, but they understand each other on a deeper level. This reminds me of something else. The memoir touches on the tension between hypermodernity and traditional values in Chinese society.
That tension is everywhere. It's in the architecture, the social customs, even in the way people use technology. And the designer seems to be constantly navigating those competing forces, trying to make sense of a world that's both rapidly changing and deeply rooted in its past.
There's this one scene that captures this so well. He's at a business meeting with the company's billionaire backer, and he's totally lost. He doesn't understand what's being said. He's relying on colleagues for translation, and he feels like a pawn in a game he doesn't even know the rules of.
It's a stark reminder of the challenges of doing business across cultures, especially when you have those language barriers and power dynamics at play. It can feel incredibly isolating even when you're surrounded by people.
And yet, even in these situations, he finds those glimmers of humor and connection. He talks about his gym bros, these young, super fit guys at his gym who end up seeking life advice from him.
It's a funny juxtaposition, and it also speaks to that inherent respect for age and experience that exists in Chinese culture. He might feel like an outsider in the business world, but here he's seen as a source of wisdom and guidance.
It's a great example of how our roles and relationships can shift depending on the context, and it shows the connection can be found in the most unexpected places. But later in the memoir, things take a darker turn. He starts to feel trapped, both physically and emotionally. His visa applications are hitting those bureaucratic snags, and he's increasingly aware of his financial precarity.
He describes himself as being in a gilded cage. He can enjoy the comforts of his surroundings, but he lacks the freedom to truly explore and experience China on his own terms. And this leads to some really profound reflections on the nature of freedom, the compromises we make in pursuit of our dreams, and the sometimes hidden costs of living abroad.
It's a reminder that even the most exciting adventures can come with a price. And it makes me wonder about the designer's motivations. What is he ultimately seeking in China? Is it professional success, personal fulfillment, a sense of belonging, or perhaps something else entirely?
Those are questions he seems to be grappling with throughout the memoir. He's clearly passionate about his work, fascinated by the culture, but he's also feeling the strain of his experiences.
It's a delicate balance, isn't it? that need to pursue our passions while also taking care of our well-being. And it raises an important question for our listeners. Have you ever felt that pull between the allure of new experiences and the need to protect yourself? How do you navigate that tension?
That's a great question to reflect on. And speaking of reflection, there's this incredibly poignant passage where the designer describes a chance encounter at a street party after a power outage and witnessing a crow being hit by a truck. He's feeling particularly raw and vulnerable.
And he stumbles upon this lively street party and finds himself sitting next to this elderly woman who radiates this sense of peace and wisdom. They don't speak the same language, but she somehow manages to convey this message of comfort and reassurance.
She emphasizes the importance of not being afraid of embracing uncertainty and finding joy in the simple things. It's exactly what he needs to hear in that moment. It's a reminder that even in the midst of chaos, there's always hope, and sometimes it comes from the most unexpected sources.
It's a beautiful reminder of the power of human connection, and this theme of unexpected kindness seems to pop up again and again. He encounters this generosity from people he barely knows, these small acts of humanity that make all the difference when you're feeling like an outsider.
It speaks to the resilience of the human spirit, our capacity for empathy and compassion, even across cultural divides. It's in those moments that he finds a sense of belonging, not necessarily in a specific place, but in the shared experience of being human.
There's another anecdote that I think speaks to this evolution in his understanding of his place in China. He talks about how, after some time, he becomes almost invisible to the crowds in a Shanghai mall. He's just another face in the sea of people, no longer a novelty or an outsider drawing attention.
It's a stark contrast to his earlier experiences where he felt constantly observed, judged, even a bit like a spectacle. Now he's blended into the background, and it sparks this reflection on visibility and invisibility.
It's like he's gone from feeling hyper-visible, like he's always on display, to this strange sense of anonymity. And it makes him question what it means to be seen, to be acknowledged, and how that shapes our sense of self.
It makes you wonder if belonging is less about being seen and more about feeling seen, about finding those connections that make us feel valued and understood, even if it's just by a handful of people.
And for him, those connections often arise in the most unexpected ways. He describes a delightful encounter with this young woman named Panda Bird at a tea room. They meet online bond over shared interests and end up having this wonderful afternoon of conversation and cultural exchange.
It's not just the shared tea and conversation that makes this encounter special. There's this subtle flirtation, a sense of mutual appreciation that adds another layer to their interaction. It reminds us that even when you're feeling lost in a foreign culture, those sparks of connection can still happen, reminding you of that universal language of human attraction and curiosity.
It seems like this encounter marks a turning point for him. He's starting to feel more comfortable in his surroundings, more confident in navigating those cultural complexities.
Yeah.
But of course, it wouldn't be a true deep dive without exploring his work life a bit more, would it? The memoir goes into detail about his creative process and the tension he feels between the demands of his clients and his own artistic vision.
That's a struggle so many creatives can relate to, regardless of where they work. He's constantly negotiating, compromising, trying to balance his creative impulses with practical constraints like budget and deadlines. And you can sense his frustration when those compromises feel like they're eroding his original vision.
There's this one point where he describes feeling completely burned out, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of decisions he has to make. But even in those moments of exhaustion, his passion for his craft shines through. He talks about those late nights spent sketching, visualizing spaces that will inspire and delight people. It's clear that he's deeply invested in his work, even when it's pushing him to his limits.
That dedication to his craft is really inspiring. It's not just about designing a functional space, it's about creating an experience, crafting an environment that will have a lasting impact on the people who interact with it. He's thinking about how people will move through the space, how they'll feel, what memories they'll create. It's a very holistic approach to design.
It's almost as if he's designing for the soul, not just the eye. And this leads to a really interesting passage where he's reflecting on the differences between Western and Chinese approaches to problem solving. He uses the analogy of chess versus Go.
It's a brilliant analogy. Chess, with its linear thinking, clear-cut rules, and defined objectives, represents that Western approach, while Go, with its focus on nuanced strategies, long-term outcomes, and a more holistic view of the board, embodies that Chinese approach. And the designer is struggling to adapt to this more fluid way of thinking. He's used to making decisions, sticking to plans, and seeing projects through in a very linear fashion. But in China, he's encountering shifting deadlines, unexpected changes, and a more collaborative approach to decision-making.
It sounds incredibly challenging, like trying to learn a new dance with a completely different rhythm and set of steps.
Exactly, and it forces him to become more adaptable, to let go of that need for control, and to embrace a more flexible way of working. And it seems like in those moments of letting go of accepting the uncertainty, he stumbles upon new and innovative solutions that he wouldn't have found otherwise.
It's like he's learning to surrender to the flow, to trust the process, even when it feels chaotic or unpredictable. And this adaptation, this willingness to embrace the unfamiliar, becomes a key part of his journey. He's not just learning about a different culture. He's allowing that culture to change him, to challenge his assumptions, and to reshape his understanding of the world.
It's a powerful reminder that true cultural immersion is about transformation, about allowing ourselves to be changed by the experiences we encounter. And it's in those moments of transformation that we often discover hidden strengths and unlock new levels of creativity and resilience.
It's a reminder that sometimes the most valuable lessons come from those experiences that push us beyond our comfort zones. And speaking of being pushed beyond his comfort zone, the memoir takes a turn inward as the designer reflects on the emotional toll of his experiences. He describes feeling like an emotional train wreck, struggling with anxiety and withdrawing from social interactions.
It's a stark portrayal of the darker side of cultural immersion. It can be incredibly exhilarating, but it can also be isolating, exhausting, and emotionally draining. And it's so important to acknowledge those challenges, to seek support when needed, and to prioritize self-care.
He's clearly feeling the strain of constantly adapting, of navigating those cultural differences, of trying to build a life in a place where he doesn't quite feel at home.
And it's a reminder that seeking help, whether from friends, family, or mental health professionals, is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength and self-awareness. It takes courage to admit when you're struggling, especially when you're in a foreign environment.
And it's important to remember that even those who appear to be thriving might be battling internal demons. There's a tendency to present a perfect image, especially on social media. But the reality is that everyone faces challenges, regardless of where they live or how successful they seem.
That's a great point. And speaking of social media, the memoir has a really interesting anecdote about his online dating experiences. It starts out lighthearted, almost comical, as he describes encountering a woman with no profile picture, and immediately assumes it's some elaborate scam.
He's picturing this criminal organization catfishing unsuspecting foreigners, which speaks to those anxieties we often have about online interactions, especially in unfamiliar contexts. But what's interesting is that despite his initial skepticism, he ends up meeting this woman, and she turns out to be a real person.
And it leads to a thought-provoking conversation about social media and its impact on dating culture in China. She talks about the pressure to present this perfect image online, the curated profiles, and carefully staged photos that create a distorted view of reality.
Which, in a way, connects back to the designer's struggles with identity and belonging. They're both grappling with this question of authenticity in a world where so much of our interaction is mediated through technology.
It's a reminder that social media can create a sense of isolation, even as it promises connection. And it raises these important questions about how technology shapes our relationships, our perceptions of each other, and even our own sense of self.
It makes me think about how we present ourselves online, the curated versions of our lives that we share with the world. And it makes me wonder if we're losing something important in that process of curation, that sense of vulnerability and authenticity that comes from sharing our imperfections, our struggles, and our less glamorous moments.
It's a delicate balance, isn't it?
Yeah.
Finding that sweet spot between protecting our privacy and allowing ourselves to be seen, to be known in all our complexity. And this tension between the desire for connection and the fear of vulnerability is something we all grapple with, regardless of where we live or how we choose to interact with technology.
It's a universal human experience, and I think the designer's exploration of it adds another layer of depth to his memoir. Now, shifting gears a bit, there's a point in the memoir where he finds himself in a business meeting with his Chinese colleagues, and he's having this major communication breakdown.
He's trying to explain his vision for a project, but his usual Western approach of being direct and assertive isn't working. He's met with blank stares, subtle resistance, and this growing sense of frustration.
It's a classic example of how cultural differences can create roadblocks in communication.
Yeah.
He's used to a style where you say what you mean, get to the point quickly, and don't beat around the bush. But in Chinese culture, direct confrontation can be seen as disrespectful, and maintaining harmony and saving face are paramount. It requires a whole different set of skills and a willingness to adapt your communication style to fit the context.
He eventually realizes that he needs to adopt a more indirect approach, paying closer attention to those nonverbal cues, and using a more collaborative style of communication. It's not about abandoning his own perspective, but about finding a way to express it in a way that resonates with his Chinese colleagues.
And it's through this adaptation, this willingness to meet them halfway, that he's able to bridge that communication gap and build a stronger, more productive working relationship. It highlights the importance of cultural intelligence, the ability to not only understand different cultures, but also to adapt your own behavior to create more effective interactions.
Absolutely. And it's a skill that can be learned and developed over time. It takes practice, patience, and a willingness to step outside of your comfort zone, but the rewards can be immense. It can mean the difference between constant misunderstandings and building meaningful relationships that allow you to thrive in a new culture.
Now, on the personal side of things, his relationship with his Chinese colleagues undergoes this interesting evolution. Early on, he feels very dependent on them, constantly needing their help to navigate even the simplest tasks, from setting up a phone to ordering food. He feels like an outsider, always relying on their expertise and cultural knowledge just to get by.
It's a common experience for those who are new to a culture. You feel like you're constantly fumbling, making mistakes, and relying on the kindness of strangers to survive. It can be humbling, but it can also be a beautiful opportunity to connect with people on a deeper level.
And as he gains more confidence, as he becomes more familiar with his surroundings, that dynamic shifts. He's no longer just this dependent outsider. He's becoming a valued member of the team, contributing his own expertise and offering a unique perspective that his colleagues appreciate.
It's a lovely illustration of how those relationships can deepen over time. It's no longer just about one-sided support. It's about mutual respect, shared learning, and recognizing each other's strength. It speaks to a more balanced, interdependent way of relating that I think is at the heart of true belonging.
It's that beautiful moment when you realize you're not just taking from a culture, you're also giving back, contributing something meaningful, and being seen as a valuable member of the community. And speaking of contributions, the memoir goes into detail about his work on a new children's play area, and his approach to design is really fascinating.
He talks about creating a canvas for children's imaginations rather than a pre-packaged experience. He wants to design a space that encourages free play, exploration, and creativity. He's thinking about how the environment will stimulate their senses, how it will spark their curiosity, and how it will allow them to create their own adventures.
It's such a thoughtful and inspiring approach. He's not just designing a playground, he's designing for the joy of discovery, for the magic of childhood, and for the limitless potential of the human imagination.
And it reminds us that good design is about so much more than aesthetics. It's about understanding human needs, creating spaces that foster well-being, and using our creativity to make the world a more playful, engaging, and enriching place.
And it seems like his work on this project goes beyond just design. He's also grappling with some deeper questions about his own identity and his place in the world. He keeps returning to this metaphor of being a boiled egg, never fully belonging in either culture.
It's a feeling that many people who've lived abroad can relate to. You're straddling two worlds, trying to reconcile different parts of yourself and wondering if you'll ever truly feel at home anywhere.
He describes attending a party in Shanghai, surrounded by this mix of international guests and stylish locals, and he realizes that he's comfortable being an observer, a participant on the fringes of this vibrant social scene. And it seems like in that moment, he finds a way to embrace his outsider status, to find a sense of belonging in the act of observing, of documenting, of making sense of the world through his unique lens.
It's a powerful reminder that belonging doesn't always mean fitting in. Sometimes it's about finding your own unique space within a larger community, a place where you can be yourself, express your creativity, and contribute in a way that feels authentic to who you are.
It's like he's found a way to reconcile those different parts of himself, to carve out a space where he can be both insider and outsider, observer and participant. It's a really nuanced understanding of belonging. But this sense of self-acceptance doesn't mean he stops pushing himself professionally. There's this great anecdote about a project where he clashes with his business partner, Bao Yu, a woman he describes as built of bullets and bricks.
Wow, that description is so vivid. You can instantly picture her, this force of nature he has to contend with.
Oh yeah, and he's at his wit's end, ready to unleash that Western bluntness, just to get his point across. But then he has this realization, this flash of cultural awareness.
Like a light bulb moment.
Yeah, he realizes that a direct confrontation would be a disaster, completely counterproductive in the context of Chinese business culture. It would damage their relationship and probably jeopardize the entire project. So instead of giving in to that impulse, he takes a step back.
He chooses a more strategic approach.
Yeah, he opts for a more nuanced approach, relying on subtle cues and gentle persuasion, and it ends up being way more effective. It's a great lesson in the power of adaptability and the importance of understanding how communication styles can differ across cultures.
You really have to adjust your approach.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that sometimes the most effective way to get your point across isn't by being the loudest voice in the room, but by being the most attuned to those unspoken dynamics at play. And speaking of unspoken dynamics, he has this fascinating observation about the importance of face in Chinese culture. He's watching a business meeting unfold and notices how everyone is carefully navigating this sensitive situation, avoiding direct confrontation, and prioritizing harmony and social standing above all else.
It's a great example of how different cultures prioritize different values in conflict resolution. In
Yeah.
Western cultures, we often value directness, even if it means ruffling a few feathers. But in Chinese culture, saving face, both your own and that of others, is paramount. Direct confrontation can be seen as a sign of disrespect, a loss of face for everyone involved, and it can really damage relationships and trust.
So it's not just about what you say, but how you say it and the potential impact your words might have on the social dynamics within the group. It's about reading between the lines, understanding those subtle cues, and finding a way to address issues without causing embarrassment or loss of face. It sounds like a delicate dance.
It is. It requires a really deep understanding of cultural nuances. It's not something you can just learn overnight, but it's a skill that can be cultivated over time through observation, empathy, and a willingness to learn from your mistakes. And speaking of learning, the designer also has some interesting observations about Chinese design aesthetics. He initially finds some of the design choices puzzling, too cluttered, or overly ornate for his Western taste.
Yeah, he's coming from a background where minimalism and functionality are often prized. But as he immerses himself in the culture, he starts to see those design choices through a different lens.
He starts to appreciate the way Chinese design often incorporates those layers of meaning, symbolism, and historical references. It's not just about creating a visually pleasing space, it's about telling a story, evoking emotions, and connecting to this rich cultural heritage.
He starts to see the beauty in those intricate details, the vibrant colors, and the playful use of texture and pattern. He realizes that what might seem chaotic or overwhelming to a Western eye can actually reflect a deep appreciation for harmony, balance, and the interconnectedness of all things. It's a reminder that beauty is often culturally defined, and that expanding our understanding of different aesthetics can really enrich our own creative perspectives.
I love how this memoir pushes us to question our assumptions, not just about China, but about our own ingrained ways of seeing the world.
Exactly. It highlights the importance of approaching new cultures with an open mind and a willingness to challenge those preconceived notions about what constitutes good design, good communication, even good living. And speaking of good living, there's this beautiful passage where he describes a moment of profound insight while attending a shadow puppet show at a street party. He's watching this simple performance, listening to the story of a lost child who is guided home by the spirit of a river, and it just strikes a chord deep within him.
The symbolism of the story, the connection to Chinese folklore and mythology, it all resonates with his own feelings of being lost and uncertain, navigating this new culture and searching for a sense of belonging.
It's a beautiful example of how art can connect us to something larger than ourselves, to those universal themes of lost longing and the search for meaning. He sees his own journey reflected in the story of this lost child, and it offers him a sense of comfort, a reminder that he's not alone in his struggles. And I think that's a powerful message for anyone who's ever felt lost or out of place, whether you're in a foreign country or simply navigating a new chapter in your life.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that those feelings of uncertainty and disorientation are part of the human experience. And sometimes those moments of feeling lost are the very things that lead us to unexpected discoveries and profound insights.
It's like we have to lose ourselves in order to truly find ourselves. And it seems like this experience sparks a shift in the designer's perspective. He's starting to see his journey in a new light, embracing the challenges as opportunities for growth and finding a sense of purpose in the midst of uncertainty.
It's a reminder that sometimes the greatest lessons come from those experiences that push us beyond our comfort zones, that force us to confront our fears and to discover hidden strengths within ourselves.
And those challenges often lead to unexpected connections and moments of profound beauty. There's a great anecdote about his visit to this bustling market where he's searching for vintage doors for a project. He describes being surrounded by this chaotic jumble of objects, haggling with vendors and navigating these labyrinthine streets.
It sounds overwhelming.
Right. But for him, it's pure joy. He's in his element surrounded by this energy of creation, the beauty of these handmade objects, and the skill of the craftsmen who bring them to life.
That passion is palpable.
And despite the language barrier, he's able to connect with these artisans, to communicate his vision, and to build a sense of trust and rapport. It's in those moments of shared appreciation for the craft, for the art of making, that he finds a sense of belonging that transcends those cultural differences.
It speaks to the power of creativity to transcend borders and to forge connections that go beyond words.
And as we wrap up our deep dive into this designer's journey, I keep coming back to this idea of embracing uncertainty. He talks about how his time in China taught him that nothing is ever truly settled, that plans change constantly, and that adaptability and flexibility are essential to navigating the complexities of life and work. He learns to let go of that need for control, to surrender to the flow of events, and to find freedom in the midst of chaos.
It's a profound lesson and one that I think resonates with all of us no matter where we live or what challenges we're facing. In a world that's constantly changing, our ability to adapt, to embrace the unknown, and to find joy in the journey is essential to living a fulfilling and meaningful life.
It's about letting go of that rigid need for certainty and finding a sense of peace in the present moment, even when things feel unpredictable or out of control. And I think that's a beautiful message to leave our listeners with today. If this designer could go back to China now, knowing all that he's learned, would he choose to return? And what might he do differently? I encourage you to reflect on your own experiences with cultural differences and how they've shaped your perspective. What challenges have you faced? What lessons have you learned? And what moments of connection have enriched your journey? Because it's in those moments of reflection and the act of making sense of our experiences that we can truly grow, expand our understanding of the world, and create a more compassionate and interconnected future.